Hi, I retired at 52, and I bet it's not what you think. I'd love to say that I picked out a career that I wanted, I went to college, got my degree, and then went out into the world and started my dream job. But that's not what happened. The reality is, life hits. At 14, my freshman year of high school, I dropped out of high school. And then at 20, I was a single parent. But I still retired at 52. Hi, friends. Welcome back. I'm Rose, and this is my channel, Retirement Recharged, where we talk about everything having to do with retirement. And if you're new here, welcome. Today I wanted to talk about how I retired at 52. And as I said, it didn't start out the way most people would have planned, because 52 is a pretty young age to retire. But I looked into certain things, and I believe the universe has a way of directing us to get back on path. As I said, I dropped out of high school when I was 14 years old. My parents divorced and in 8th grade, and we ended up selling our home. We had to move somewhere else, had to start a new school, have all new friends. And my mom was raising 4 girls on her own because my dad relocated to another state for work. It was during a time when work was really tough here in Arizona, so he had to relocate to make a good living. And he paid child support, and that helped, but things were still tough. They're always tough when you go through a divorce. And it kind of felt like they divorced each other, but they also divorced us because our lives changed drastically. And part of that change was all 4 of us became a little bit more independent because my mom had to work and she went back to school and she tried to, support us the best she could. But she also found some freedom that she didn't have because my parents married right out of high school. So when they divorced, she found some freedom and was able to go out and have a good time with her friends and start dating. And eventually she remarried, as well as my father remarried. When my mother remarried, then we just had this new man in the house as well. And that really changed the dynamics once again. So unexpectedly, I just kind of went through a depression, I think, and stopped going to school and eventually found out I didn't have to go to school. In Arizona, if you're 14, you don't have to go to school. They can't make you go. So of course I chose to not go. But yet I still managed to retire at 52. And I'm going to share that with you now. As I said, I think the universe has ways of getting you back on track when you get off track. And part of that was having my son. He really saved my life because when I had my son, it made me realize that I had to be responsible for not just me, but for another human being. And that made me want to buckle down and try to do the right things. But the universe stepped in and brought to me an unexpected career with a local government here in the valley in Arizona. And this job was not one I would have dreamt of, not one I ever heard of, but it was driving a garbage truck. And so that's what I did. I was one of the first females to drive a garbage truck here in the valley in Arizona. And that brought with it good pay and good benefits, which is really what I was after so I could support myself and my son on our own without any dependence on the government, my parents, or any handouts. It was important to me that I make it on my own. And so I took that job. And I drove a garbage truck for about a year. And in that time, I met people that worked with the city and found out that the city also provided tuition reimbursement. And that was something I never heard of, that you could go to college, first of all, and second of all, that somebody else would pay for it. And when we were growing up and the parents went through a divorce and everything, and my parents were, they're human beings. They were just trying to make ends meet and get on with their life and try to rebuild their lives as well. They never mentioned to us that we could go to college. I never thought about that. I didn't know anybody that went to college. We actually moved from Michigan, where our whole family was, to Arizona, and we were the only ones here, our family. So I didn't know anybody that went to college. So that wasn't even a thought in my mind or my sister's mind. And the sad part is, Because of the divorce and the change in our family and everything, changed the dynamics. Out of the four of us girls, only one of us graduated high school. But surprisingly now, two of us have college degrees. And mine was because I worked for local government and they had tuition reimbursement. So a friend of mine talked me into taking some classes, just a couple classes. I had my GED when I dropped out of high school. So I registered, I took a couple classes, and I found out I was pretty good at school. So I took more classes and started working towards a goal of becoming a supervisor. I didn't want to drive a garbage truck forever. And in fact, I only really had to drive it for a year. It took me about 10 years to promote my way through to be a supervisor, so I didn't have to work outside as much anymore. Because, as you know, here in Arizona, it gets really hot in the summers, and it's unbearable. Now, I could tolerate it more when I was younger, but as I got older, it was more and more unbearable. But I stayed with local government for 28 years. And in that time, I promoted. As I said, I got my degree and I even started towards a master's degree and worked my way through the city because there's all kinds of opportunities with local government. So I was able to move from a garbage truck driver to the point where I retired with a really good pension. And after 28 years, my first eligibility date was me turning 52. So I retired late September of 2015, and I retired successfully just on my pension. Now, the way I did that was I maxed out my 457, which is like a 401k. And the 457, maxing it out, allowed me to lower my take-home pay to an amount that would be close to what my pension would be. Local government typically has a retirement calendar, or calculator rather, that you could use. So you could determine what your pension would be. And so I used that number to kind of see what it would look like if I just had that amount coming in as pay on my paycheck, to see if I could successfully retire on my pension. Now, mind you, 10 years before I retired, I did get married, my first marriage, and only marriage, hopefully. I did get married. And so I had that pay as well, but I was just really looking to see if I retired, could we make it on just my pension and whatever my spouse's pay was. And so playing with those numbers is what afforded me the ability to do that. Now, 4 years after I retired, my spouse retired as well. So because my spouse worked for the private sector, there was no pension. I was the only one with a pension. So we had my pension and my spouse's 401k, and then my 457. So we used the investments to subsidize my spouse's paycheck, let's say, until we both reached Social Security age. So once we reached that, and my spouse is 4 years older than me, so that Social Security came in 4 years before mine. I just got my Social Security a year ago. So right now, we're living on my pension and two Social Securities. And we live in an active adult community, as I mentioned in my very first video. And it has a lot of amenities here at our community. And we're able to meet the needs of living in our home and paying the amenities, HOA fees here, which are substantial, and still travel a little bit. We do a lot of camping where we do what's called boondocking. So we're not really paying for a fee necessarily all the time. There's a lot of free land around in Arizona that you can camp on for 14 days for free. You don't have any utilities, so we have a solar panel, and we bring our own water. And of course, you have your dump that you dump your toilet and stuff like that. But so we still travel a little bit. So we take some trips that we have to pay for, of course. And then we do the boondocking, but we also stay in some national parks. And that's like $20 to $40 a night, which is very affordable. So that's mostly what we do to have fun, besides the activities here in our active adult community that we live in. And the 55 plus community we live in, like I said before, there are a ton of activities. So if you're bored here, you're not trying. They have all these organize social activities from wine tasting to sports to concerts on the lawn, to going to movies, Broadway shows that come into town, and those kind of things. So I mean, it's just a myriad of things. And then there's clubs. There's card clubs, pool, billiards. There's all kinds of classes. There's two gyms here, 3 restaurants, and of course the golf course. So there's plenty to keep you busy. So we really wanted to live this lifestyle, and we wanted to make sure that we could afford to do that. And one of the ways we could do that is when we were both working, because we live in Arizona and it's so hot here, we got to the point where we couldn't stay here in the summer all the time. So we do what everybody does in Arizona. Everybody heads up north, where it's cooler. It's like 7,000 feet. So it's a lot cooler there in the summertime. So that's where we decided to go. And while we were up there, we bought a cabin. But once we retired and we determined that we wanted to retire at that point, we decided that we were going to have to sell our vacation home, our cabin up north. And that's what we ended up doing. So that's what funded the home we're in now. So we, as I mentioned in my first video, when we retired, we moved to Florida right away to live on the beach. And then we ended up selling that home, took the profit from that home, the second home that we had up north, and we live where we live now. So we still have a little bit of a mortgage, but we also have the really low interest rates. We were able to get those low interest rates that were not too long ago. We'll probably never see those interest rates again. So we decided it was better to have that mortgage rather than use our money that's earning, a higher percentage rate in investments. So, but with my pension, which is a really good pension, and then our 2 Social Security checks, it's enough to pay for us to live here and to have the life that we're having right now. So I guess the most important thing I could tell anybody planning for retirement is, do it when you can, but do it when you're comfortable, and make sure that it's sustainable, because there's nothing worse than being retired. I see it in our community all the time. You're retired, you're enjoying your life, and then you have to go back to work because it's not sustainable. So make sure you look at what you need to live comfortably, what's comfortable for you, because it's different for everybody. What's comfortable for you, what you need to do, and that it's sustainable. And that means you make all kinds of different decisions and choices that you can live with. Like, for example, I don't get my hair colored anymore. I decided to let the gray grow in. I don't go get my hair cut at a fancy salon anymore. I go to Great Clips. It's honestly, it's like $17 for senior citizens. When we go out to eat, we look for senior citizen deals. We look for early bird specials. We also look for happy hours where, they have specials like 2-for-1s or something like that. So we can still go out and enjoy ourselves and meet friends and get to see things that we want to see, but at a discounted price, which allows you to do more of them. And honestly, we don't go out to eat that much. We try to cook more at home. We try to spend more time here in our community since we're paying for it. And, our hobbies are things that aren't expensive. Our sports aren't expensive. Like, I mentioned we play pickleball. Very minimal fee to play pickleball. We don't golf because to us, that's not feasible. Not just buying the clubs, but I mean, people are paying $90 to golf. And that's a lot. I mean, for 2 people, $90 per person. And then you're spending like 4 to 5 hours out there golfing. That's not something that we want to spend our money on. And that's what you need to look at. You want to retire, you want it to be sustainable, but you want to be comfortable, and do the things that you enjoy doing and figure out what you need to do. Maybe you cut expenses in other areas so you can afford the things that you want to do. But anyway, so that's how I retired at 52. Been retired for a little over 10 years now. Still sustainable. Of course, the older we get, the less we spend too. So we found that out too. Like, I don't eat as much. So, I'm not spending as much on food, and we just don't want as much. Like, everything we want, we pretty much have already. And plus we're at that stage where we're starting to downsize some of our stuff because we don't want to leave it to our kids. So we're not buying things as much. It's more about enjoying things like experiences and just hanging out with friends and things like that. It doesn't really cost much to have people over to play cards. People bring their own drinks and maybe you just supply some snacks and you kind of rotate so you're not doing it all the time. The other friends are doing it too. And so that's an inexpensive way to have a good time and build friendships. So anyways, when did you retire? Maybe tell me what you did to retire and maybe some of the things that you had to cut to make your retirement feasible and sustainable. So I'd appreciate if you could subscribe because it really helps me out and leave a comment. Let's keep the conversation going. I'm really interested in knowing what you did to retire and when you retired. And I really appreciate you coming in, listening to me talk, and try to drop another video in another week. So I hope you tune back in. Thank you.